Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HuntScience podcast. I'm your host, Eric Lance, a professionally certified wildlife biologist and natural resource professional, college professor, and owner of Land Source Consulting. The HuntScience podcast is dedicated to bring you the latest information on popular habitat management topics, wildlife science, hunting strategies, and the general conservation and land management practices to help preserve our natural resources. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to have you with us and hope that you enjoy today's episode. With that said, let's get started. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our primary sponsor, Land Source Consulting. Land Source Consulting is an Ohio-based wildlife and land management consulting company that I own and operate not only here in Ohio, but through the Midwest and beyond. At Land Source, we work with private landowners just like you to build and develop those property-specific management programs to help bring the goals that you have on your property to life. If you're interested in getting more information on who we are and how we can help you, please visit us over at landsourceconsulting.com. There you can check out the different service packages and capabilities that we can provide. We would love to hear from you, so don't hesitate to reach out to us and schedule that free consultation either through our website, or you can reach out to us and connect with us on our other social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram. That's landsourceconsulting.com, building relationships for a more sustainable future. All right, everybody, welcome back once again to another episode of the HuntScience podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Eric Lance, and I want to thank those of you who are once again returning to the show, as well as give a big welcome to those who are new. First and foremost, if you've not subscribed to the channel, please take a few moments to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and as well, hit that bell notification icon so you can be updated when we release new content here on the show. All of this takes just a few seconds and helps the show out tremendously. Those of you who are doing it and that are continuing to do it, please keep going. It really, really helps us out, and we really appreciate all the support. Now, on today's show, we have Dr. Marcus Lashley from University of Florida Deer Research Laboratory, as well as the co-host of the ever-popular Wild Turkey Science podcast. We also have with us Mark Wiley, who is a biologist with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Wildlife, and someone who works extensively with the popular game bird here in the state of Ohio. In this episode, I really wanted to get these two together so we could sit down just prior to the start of turkey season, not only here in Ohio, but the surrounding states, and discuss this ever so popular and polarizing bird, the wild turkey, which is one that we all definitely love to pursue. We go into a lot of really good discussions covering a wide array of topics filled with great information, of course. And for those of you who are interested in managing your property for better wild turkey success, not only this year or the years to come, it's definitely one that you're going to want to tune in and stay engaged with. With that being said, I hope everyone enjoys today's episode, and let's get this thing started. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the HuntScience podcast. I'm your host, Eric Lance, and today I am joined by Marcus and Mark for an epic turkey podcast. I'm excited about this one. Gentlemen, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited too. Always like talking turkeys.
There we go. Mark, how we doing?
Doing well. Glad to be with you.
Good. Awesome. So we might have another guest jump on here, Paul from episode 11, Paul Campbell from the NWTF. He might be jumping on. He ran into some kid issues. So if he pops in here, great. If not, no big deal. But just like I do every other podcast, get everybody introduced to the guests before we get talking. So I'll let you guys kind of take a moment, whoever wants to go first, kind of introduce who you are, where you grew up and what led you down the path of, being a biologist.
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah,
I was like, don't everybody jump at once.
So I'm from Central Ohio. Currently work for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Wildlife. I was a farm kid in Central Ohio. We did not have turkeys when I grew up. Our part of the state did not. I should specify. So we certainly had turkeys in the more forested areas of Ohio. So I actually started my biology career working in smaller game birds, upland game birds, quail and pheasants. And then I made the transition sort of out of necessity into the forest game bird world just about 5 years ago. So I'm a relative newcomer to the turkey management, turkey biology world, but very glad to be working with turkey. It's a fascinating bird. It is the most exciting hunt I've ever experienced. I am a bird hunter. I'll admit I've got some English setters, so I still like chasing those pheasants and quail. That's probably my primary passion. But as I mentioned, there is nothing more exciting than a spring turkey hunt. So, so yeah, I've got the fever. I'm sold, and I'm glad to be talking with you today about wild.
Awesome. Yeah, I got 2 pointers, so I'm a big pheasant guy too. We'll have to get together. We can get some dogs out and go do some
Nice.
hunting. But yeah, that's awesome, man. So, Marcus, you're up, brother.
Yeah. So I have been passionate about turkeys since I could walk. So, basically it's been in my veins for my entire life. I was in a place where I grew up in kind of central West Alabama, in a place where there were a lot of turkeys. And I was really fortunate to grow up in that situation. And, basically hunting turkeys and, I hunt other stuff too, deer and other game birds. But turkeys have always been special to me. So they kind of led me down the path of going into wildlife ecology field. And I went to Mississippi State and got a degree in forestry and wildlife management, because in the South, if you're going to be managing wildlife, you're going to be managing forests. And then I got a forestry and wildlife degree at the University of Tennessee with Craig Harper, who some of your listeners may have heard of. He's renowned for habitat-focused work on game species. And that led me a little farther down. I took a state agency job and got a lot of experience managing public land with fire and timber harvest and all sorts of things, and just wasn't quite what I was looking for. I really wanted to get into an extension role like what Craig had been in, and I found a position at North Carolina State where I could study deer and turkeys and coyotes and how they were interacting with fire regimes and in the state there. So really awesome position to take with Chris Moorman, who was formerly their extension specialist, and that kind of led me down the path to become a professor. And now I'm a professor at the University of Florida, and I have an extension role, which is, if anybody has heard of me, I try to get information out through various forms and have the Wild Turkey Science podcast as part of that effort. So always love talking turkey, and it got me here, particularly turkeys, and I just am trying my best to do research and outreach to give back.
Nice. You like that warm weather, man. You don't want to come up to the northern states at all? You're going to Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, NC State. I mean, the first you got is Tennessee. Come up here to Ohio in the snow belt and you get 6-8 inches.
Yeah. It's quite different. I've done a fair amount of work, and I've gone and spoke at different events and things, in the northern states. And my wife is actually from Michigan, so not that far from you guys. But
Mark and I are about to hang up. You said the M word. Yep, this is over.
Yeah, sorry guys.
Yeah. But yeah, that's awesome. So, kind of segueing into the different topics that we kind of have outlined, let's talk about now, with Marcus being in the southern part of the United States, Mark being up here in the Midwest, northern parts. Let's talk about the ecological needs and the cover types that we see turkeys utilizing and see the differences, depending on the landscape where you are. Mark, we'll let you start it off.
Right.
You're number one, Marcus, you're number two, just like in the kid games. 1, 2. There we go. Ones are up.
Yeah, I mean, in talking wild turkey habitat, I often emphasize to folks that we refer to them as a forest generalist, meaning they can utilize, and they are very adaptable. They utilize a wide variety of habitats. In Ohio, that's everything from intensive agricultural areas with some forest habitat to our most heavily forested areas in the state in eastern Ohio and southern Ohio. So within that, I mean, we see our best turkey abundances where they have a bit of a mix of both. So areas with 40 to 50% forest cover, and then open lands make up the rest of the landscape, and that can be row crop agriculture. pasture lands. That's where those are the counties in Ohio where we see our highest turkey abundances. And within that, I guess, the things that they're utilizing, not only those mature forest areas where they're going to find food, resources, roost trees, some cover, but we really try to emphasize nesting habitat, brood rearing habitat. And essentially what you need there with any ground nesting bird is concealing cover. You find that in some open forested areas or shrubby sort of young forest areas, edges, if properly maintained, and then some of our herbaceous fields. So anywhere within Ohio, or I guess across the Midwest, where you've got a good matrix of those various cover types, you're going to see good wild turkey numbers, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially in Ohio, I do a lot of work in like Northwest Ohio, and you don't see a whole lot of turkeys up there because, I mean, if you got 40 acres, 38 and a half of it is monocrop agriculture with like a little timber patch, type of thing. So you can have turkeys in those areas, but it's going to take some management. But anyway, yeah, Marcus.
Yeah, I think we're in pretty close alignment. The relative importance of factors might change. For instance, we're usually not roost tree limited, but there are places where that is the case. What I see across the South is, some of the components are poor or missing from the landscape, and in those areas you see relatively poor productivity. And what I mean by that, we in the South, most of the forested areas historically were fire prone, and what you get when you have really frequent fire is an open forest type. So think about 50 or 60% sunlight penetration at a minimum into those kinds of stands, and then a frequent fire return. And when I say frequent, I mean on average in Florida, we're talking about sub 2-year return intervals.
Oh, really?
And then over a lot of the South, that might be about 3-year return. So every 3 years, every piece of ground is receiving fire. When you have that kind of landscape intact, where you have that open forest type, and there'll be natural openings that go with that kind of landscape operating that way, you end up with this heterogeneous matrix like Mark was just describing. But here, because the growing season is so long and a lot of the soils are so productive with that growing season and rainfall, without the frequent fire, the canopy opening and the benefits that come, particularly for nesting cover and brooding cover, they go away pretty fast. So I think that's something that's a key difference, in the South comparatively, is we have to have really frequent disturbance to maintain a couple of those components. And the other real challenge, I think, and I focused on it a lot because it's so important for productivity, is most of the places that we would call brooding cover here have been converted to an alternative management practice. An alternative objective is being met with those lands that are not conducive to poult reproduction. So that's a big problem that I see. And we've had 3 studies in the South that independently in different states identified that if you add the percentage of nesting, what we'd call high quality nesting, and high quality brooding together, we're still at the landscape scale in a single digit % of the landscape.
Yeah, it's interesting up here, Mark. I'm interested to see what you see. But I live up in Northeast Ohio, and almost all the landowners I work with, all of the properties I've been on, even my own personal properties that I hunt, I'm the property that I'll see in the fall. I'll see 70 turkey. They're roosting in the timber stands that we have. They're not mature by any stretch of the imagination. When you're talking about, canopy percentage, you're probably 5-10%. I mean, I can see 200-300 yards through it. There's not much understory development, right? But there's some decent sized trees. I think the word mature is subjective given what you're looking at. But there's definitely some trees in there that have diameters of 20 plus. So we have turkeys roosting in there. I'll give you an example. My parents' property, I see 70 turkeys out there, and I've got videos of them coming out in the winter, everything like that. And for my deer stand, I can hear them going up into roost. But as we start transitioning and getting closer, to the springtime, nesting season and things like that, they start going away because there's nothing there. There's a mowed field, mowed yard from my parents' property, hard 90-degree edge, and a very immature, poorly managed, forest, type of thing. Now, my parents only own probably maybe 3 or 4 acres of the woods, but there's about 300 acres around it, that I don't have permission to do any timber work on, so it kind of is what it is. But I think that's pretty typical of the landscape that we see up here. So I think a lot of frustrations that hunters have is they're like, I don't know where my turkeys are going. Well, I'll tell you where they're going. They're going someplace where they can build a nest and they can start to do things, and that's just not your property, and by managing your property. Yeah. Go ahead, Marcus.
I was going to say, you can change that.
Yeah, exactly.
In a lot of situations. Which I think is where you're about to go.
Yeah, and that's the goal is going in there and opening up that canopy. I know you guys did a great episode on it with Dr. Harper. And yeah, it's just those types of things, are vastly important when it comes to turkeys because, I don't hunt my parents' property for turkeys in the spring because I just don't see them. I might catch, a young Jake running around or something like that. That's just something I'm not interested in harvesting, but in the fall, this past fall, I missed an opportunity to get a really big tom. Like he came out of nowhere and I was like, oh my God, but I didn't get a good shot on him. So it was one of those to where I hear the frustration from a lot of people. And I think that's something that is pretty typical here in the Midwest. I mean, Mark, what do you guys run into? Because I know you're on more state land and you guys are working kind of in a mosaic between state and private. I mean, are you guys seeing pretty much, anything similar?
Yeah. I mean, you bring up an excellent point about the hard edge, and to dive into that a little further. I mean, what we see in a lot of Ohio are areas that are maintained as open space, row crop agriculture, pasture, or mowed field, unfortunately, as you described. And then the areas that are allowed to become forest are generally undisturbed. And Marcus touched on that a little bit. And hopefully, you mentioned roost tree limited, Marcus. I hope that I didn't imply that Ohio might be that. We are not. I was.
Yeah. Well, I was saying that there are places.
Yeah,
I wasn't.
Certainly, but Ohio is not one of those. So if I made that, it made it sound like that. That's my bad. But Eric kind of laid out, these areas where we see hard edge. It's those open fields that don't offer turkeys much, at least not much nesting cover, not brood rearing cover, which is vitally important in Ohio as well. And then you get into the mature forest where there are resources for wild turkey in there, but they need that intermediate space, that mid-ground in the successional stage. And that's where they get that vitally important nesting cover and brood rearing cover. And I hear the hunters, the landowners, just like Eric described, they say, well, I see the turkeys in the winter and then they disappear. Or the flip side of that is, well, I see them in the spring and then I don't see them in the winter. Those properties probably have different features that turkeys are utilizing seasonally. And so, I always encourage landowners to think about what turkeys are using that time of year. And if you want to see nesting on your property, if you want to provide brood rearing habitat, you've got to create some disturbance in the areas where it's possible.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned that too on the inverse. I look at my parents' property. It like I said, it's not mature, but it's an oak hardwood. So there's plenty of oaks in there in the fall. There's plenty of acorns that are out there. Different trees and different growth stages and things like that. So I mean, yeah, it's just always interesting, and people just don't think about it. It's like, hey man, there's a reason why. You're not seeing them. They didn't just magically disappear because are you not seeing the timing that every fall you've got 40 to 50 turkeys, but in the spring you don't. Right. Then the next fall, 40 to 50 turkeys, spring, you don't. It's like, this is a cyclical pattern here that you're not noticing, and figuring out what's going on.
Eric, I was going to add to that. that, that is biological in nature, but if you think about it a little differently, they're telling you what the limiting factor is
Yeah,
for
exactly.
you. What are you not providing them? If you have that cycle where they're moving on somewhere else during part of the year, and you understand their biology and what they need at that time of the year, then you can start to understand where you need to focus efforts to, provide for the species. So they're giving you hints into, which management practices, for instance, can make the biggest impact in your particular
And it,
case.
Yeah, for sure.
to me, how much wildlife biology, what doesn't matter the species we're talking about, it's narrowing down to that missing piece. What's the missing piece of the puzzle
Mm-hmm.
in this landscape? So whether you're talking with a public land area manager or a private landowner, it's all right, you've got this, but we're missing this, and we've got to fill that gap.
Yeah, exactly. Let's excuse me. Let's talk about, Marcus, let's talk about, I know you've done a lot of work with timber. Let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about, we keep talking about managing for timber. Let's talk about managing our timber for turkey success, both from, mature timber stands and more of the woodland, importance. Because I know on your episode that you guys did with Craig Harper, you guys really outlined in an awesome way, talking about the difference between the timber maturity and what a woodland actually offers in terms of habitat components, both for adult and poult success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you probably heard Craig say, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. If you want to, like, if we were just going to pick something that was the best possible way to manage for turkeys,
That's where I was going. Yeah.
Yeah, and that would be in a woodland stand, like with variable retention of hardwoods. In your case, it'd primarily be hardwoods. It doesn't have to be hardwoods. And what I mean by that is you have variation in the amount of sunlight that's coming in. So you can flip that and think about how much canopy coverage you have, but really the resource that's limiting in the forest is light. So if you have a forest stand that's completely closed canopy, light is the number one limiting factor there. And if you go in and take some of those trees, think about what the light is doing, right? Those trees are using that light and creating growth and reproduction for them. So basically, you're turning light into trees. I want to turn light into turkeys. So the trees are in the way at that point. So think about it like that. So if you have a forest stand, let's just say you have 100 acres, what you would be trying to accomplish in that, it's not that you wouldn't have any closed canopy. There's some value there, but you also want some relatively open canopy and then a gradient in between. And if you're accomplishing that across that 100 acres, you could really be accomplishing all of the things that a turkey needs all at once in that type of management strategy. So the problem, well, there's some problems that come in, those problems come a little slower where you're at than where I'm at. But if you don't have a recurring disturbance, you have hardwood regeneration in particular that, within 5 or 6 years, you're starting to get toward a point where it's less valuable for turkeys and you need some sort of intermediate disturbance to come back to help with that. But just think about having variability in that light penetration, and then if you add in other disturbances like prescribed fire, then you can really enhance the mosaic of structure in the understory. And so in that case, you have mast production and roost trees, and then you have the higher sunlight areas, and a few years into that, that's really great nesting structure. And then right after a disturbance for the first couple of years, and then after fire, you can have some really awesome brooding cover. And those three things in that type of management strategy are now arranged such that they are usable for turkeys all at the same time. And that's a key component, as they are together. And you think about a poult when it's, right after it hatches for about 2 weeks, that thing is tiny. It can't go far.
Yeah.
Right. You're not, I forget what Mike Chamberlain's exact numbers were, but they had a study where they measured the probability of survival based on how far the poults had to go to poult rearing cover.
Oh,
And after you get over about 500 yards, I think he said the cutoff was 750 or something like that. But if you have poults that are having to go that far, they are very unlikely to survive that. So you're trying to put all of these things together, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for that in upland hardwood systems, to manage like that, and it's not often realized.
Yeah, definitely. Because another thing is too, is you don't need, like you mentioned a good point, like everything, kind of those transition areas in between, having closed canopy and having those kind of gradient areas, because those are also, you mentioned the poults, right? I mean, those things are little, but after a couple of weeks and they start to be able to take a little bit of flight, they're not going to roost way up with mom and everything else. So having that different successional layer and different stages of growth with different trees and getting them off the ground, even if it's 3 feet, 4 feet, right? That's at least getting them off the ground to avoid things like predation and being able to survive a little bit more. So you need that diversity, both in, diameter and size class of your trees, vegetative cover and densities on the understory. I mean, all those different types of things are just important.
Yeah. Well, and, I talk to landowners from various parts of the country about this a lot, and I hear it from the Appalachians and the central hardwoods regions. A lot of people would say, well, none of it looks like that. Like, what, why would I want my hardwoods to look like that? It doesn't, across the landscape. And my answer to that is, if you take a historical look at it, it did. I made a post on Instagram about this that seemed to resonate with people. There was a study where they tried to reconstruct all of the open forest across the East, and it was essentially the entire landscape. Ohio was a little bit of an outlier. It was more closed forest than some other states, but most of the upland hardwood systems were described more like a savanna, an oak savanna, which means there's a low density of hardwoods on average across the landscape, and fire was a big part of the reason it looked like that. And that, is basically absent from a large portion of that range now. That structure and forest type plus the driver of why it looked like that, those two things are very, very less common, I'll just say it, across that landscape now.
Yeah, Mark, you probably deal with this more. I mean, Ohio, I talked with Bronson a little bit about this because he had brought up fire for what we were talking about with deer. And I just said, I mean, Ohio, man, we just don't burn a lot. I mean, I know the state does, okay, but fire is just not utilized near as much. And I don't know if that's because of how urbanized Ohio is. I mean, I really don't know. I think a lot of it has to do with a cultural thing. I think people just don't think about it, and understand that that's a component. So I think there's a little bit of everything kind of mixed in there. But how often does the state do you guys use fire?
You bring up some excellent points. I don't think prescribed fire is part of our culture here, like we see in some of the South, particularly Western states. So that's one issue. And Smokey the Bear, he did two.
It's great propaganda.
Everybody that fire is bad. I mean, for important reasons at the time, but now we've got to kind of rein that in a little bit and emphasize some of the values of fire, controlled fire, prescribed fire. You are correct. The state does utilize prescribed fire, not only in forested systems, but in grassland systems, in every opportunity that we can. We're very limited by weather conditions and timing. I mean, we've got a pretty narrow window. Our fire crews have a narrow window in which we can actually execute those fires, and a lot of hurdles to jump through to get fire on the landscape. But as Marcus was describing, some of the benefits not only of various forest management activities, but adding fire to that, I'm thinking of some of our southeastern public lands, heavily forested lands, where oak is our emphasis for wildlife habitat. It's managing not only a healthy forest system, but trying to get oak back on the landscape the way that we likely had a long time ago. And fire was probably the reason for that centuries ago. So I was actually thinking of a turkey habitat program we put on a few months ago, and we basically had one field stop for not only wildlife professionals and foresters that were interested in wild turkey habitat, but we took some landowners out there to show what can be done. And we went to one of our publicly owned forested areas, and it was a shelter wood cut where we've had recurring prescribed fire. And essentially we're managing for oak. And what you had is a broken canopy of mature oaks that are providing that mast resource. And then underneath, because you have that broken canopy and that sunlight, which Marcus describes vitally important to creating that ground level cover, we had what we considered to be excellent nesting and brood rearing cover down below. And hopefully, centuries down the road, decades down the road, maybe a century down the road, we've got those young oaks that are going to become the mature oaks and replace what we have now and be good acorn producers in the future. And as you said, we've got to move on to a new area, create that understory in a nearby spot so that those poults don't have to go 500, 700 meters to get to good brooding areas. So for Ohio, really, I see oak management as the best strategy for forest management for wildlife, including the wild turkey.
Yeah, and in that shelter wood with fire technique, most people, when I talk to them about that, they don't quite understand the ecology that's going on in that. So if you have, the frequency, what frequent means would change depending on where you're at. But if you have recurring fire, there are basically what you're doing is shifting favor to species that benefit from fire. Like they have adaptations to be more competitive in that condition than other species. So if you have recurring fire, a lot of our upland oak species that are really common across, some of these stands, they have characteristics that actually promote fire. The way that their leaves curl and the way that they build the leaf substrate are more flammable, promote fire. And we have a whole bunch of other species like your maples and elms, depending on where you're at, things like that are more mesic species. They are disfavored by fire, and they have a suite of characteristics that dampen they literally dampen the forest. They create a higher moisture environment. Their leaves tend not to curl and create that fluffy litter, that would be the fuel for the fire. And what you see in that kind of scenario is if you don't have fire in it, you don't shift favor to those species that benefit from fire, and you'll have essentially you set succession on a different trajectory. And we've seen that across a lot of the eastern hardwood forests. And I've been a part of a big research team that have scientists that, from Penn State to Mississippi State to Florida, up in, into Minnesota. Like we've got scientists all over the place that are working together on this idea of mesification, where the forest is literally transitioning into a less flammable state because of that lack of fire. And I think that's really important for people to understand. It's providing that short-term benefit of, providing really good nesting and brooding structure, but also that process is setting the trajectory of the forest for the future of what that forest will look like and what that composition will look like, what trees will actually make it into the canopy and be, that older tree is being determined at that young stage.
Yeah, and for people listening to this, some people are probably like, "Oh my God, like how do we do it?" Well, a chainsaw works really well, but
Yeah.
you have to understand what trees that
Yes.
you're actually looking at, right? And there's plenty of. I actually got I'm actually working on filming a couple of segments of some content on a property that I got access to.
Oh,
So I'm
great.
going to do some timber, kind of content on that, but I'll talk more about that in the video. But there are plenty of apps out there. You don't have to do it
Hmm.
the old school way that we all learned in school, keying out plants with a book and looking
Yeah.
at leaf structure. Is it whorled? Is it whatever that type of thing. Now you have these apps that are actually pretty good. They
Hmm.
use AI and you can pretty accurately determine what tree you're dealing with, and then learning how to take a little chainsaw and learning how to girdle. You don't have
Hmm.
to fell every tree,
Right.
so it's not as difficult as what people think it is. I think some people make the mistake of not understanding too much, and they go in there and try to
Hmm.
fell a tree in a closed canopy system and go, well, that just got hung up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now they're going, I think everyone's been there,
Right.
but it's not as difficult as what it sounds, is
Yeah.
opening up that canopy.
But don't be
I'm glad you're creating some resources like that. I've worked with a bunch of people on forest stand improvement content.
Yeah.
The one professor at Purdue was he went through the same lab with me, and he's done some up in that that region with hardwood management. But yeah, just forest stand improvement can go a long way, and you probably have some situations where you have quite a few trees that are just frankly not worth much. So but they may be hindering you
Yeah.
substantially from doing things that you want to do.
Yeah, I got a lot of beach around me.
Yeah, that's a good example of one
Yeah,
that's
beach.
hindering you. That's
Yeah.
also not
I
valuable.
So, yeah, just being able just to teach people, like, again, how to take a diameter of a tree and understanding why that's important on putting trees into a size class, and saying, hey, I've got this oak tree that's, 20 inches in diameter breast height, to say, okay, I want to do a release. Well, old Forster's trick, okay, you double or go 1.5, so 30 feet from that tree, and take everything out from underneath there and really open up that tree back to start exhibiting secondary growth or getting wider, so
Mhm.
that resources are promoting the maturity of that tree and more crop production and things like that. It's that simple. You go with an immature, something that most of that stuff's probably like 6 to 8 inches in diameter. You can cut that down and push it with your hand, with a
Mhm.
chainsaw, and you can really do a lot of good just by opening up those small areas, by targeting a few trees each year, if that's the way that you have to do it. Because
Mhm.
again, we don't burn in here. And like Mark said, Ohio is not known for its consistent weather. I think it's supposed to be like 70 on Thursday, then drop back down to 30 on Friday, type of thing. So, the burning window is very, very small, and,
Well,
it's hard to do.
another thing just to add to that, that it's even smaller because of that forest transition.
Yeah.
The suite of conditions that stand would be flammable in as an open forest type that's primarily dominated by litter from species that are pyrophytic, that like fire. That the range of times when that is flammable is far different than a closed canopy hardwood system that has a lot of maples and beeches and that sort of stuff in it. Like
Yeah.
they're not even on the same planet in terms of when you can burn and under what circumstances, and that really is limiting the opportunity for that practice. Especially up there, it's even more limited.
And whatever your interest in forest management on a private property, I would encourage anybody to seek help. Uh, Typically, your
Yeah.
state forest agency or state wildlife agency have folks that can come and evaluate properties. I know that's the case in Ohio. We have
Mm-hmm.
wildlife management consultants that'll visit properties and provide guidance, and then we have state foresters as well. If your interest is more in timber production, but they have wildlife knowledge as well. So yeah, a lot of times I have to think that in every state there's somebody that can provide you some more hands-on guidance, if
Yeah.
on-site guidance, and seek that out.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of it anymore. I mean, we do it, and then I mean, there's there's tons of people available. I mean, it's not like it was 15, 20 years ago, where it was hard to, probably find consultants back then, or just people that had an understanding. All right, let's kind of shift into briefly, Marcus, on the predator aspect, because your sidekick, Dr. Will, he's kind of known as the predator guy, whether I think he likes it or not.
Well, we're running a series right now on predator management. Well, I'm happy to go over that briefly.
Yeah, it's something that we definitely could spend a whole episode, multiple episodes on, as you guys are going to, but just briefly, talk about the predator's role.
Well, here's your sound bite that's going to shock everybody. Predators ate turkeys.
Yeah.
We know that. That's obvious to everybody. Lots of things like to eat turkeys, including me. I like to eat them too. The question is whether or not they're limiting and what to do about it. And I think most people immediately think of predator management, like I just said, as removing predators. And that is, I would say, far from the truth of the situation. If you're in a landscape where there is nowhere to nest, the predator isn't the factor that's important. It's the nest, not having a nesting cover. And what people fail to realize in that situation is that habitat is a predator management tool. So all of these things that we're talking about, enhancing cover so that the hen can better conceal herself, that is reducing predation. And we have data from various places with various species suggesting the effect size of that practice on reducing predation is far more than what we can achieve through other types of predator management. So I like to be very clear about that, because most people don't think about habitat management as a tool to reduce predation, but it is the best tool at your disposal. So the same is true for poult rearing. And you think about if we go back into this habitat talk for a minute, when you're a poult that is 7 days old and you can't fly, you also can't thermoregulate. And one thing that I have seen quite a bit from people that is a big misunderstanding is they think that the main risk to that poult is predation. And that in some cases can be true, but when it is true, it's when you've accomplished really high quality brooding cover that don't allow the compensatory reasons to die to occur, like getting too hot in the south or getting too cold in the north. That thermoregulation will kill poults. And if you don't have the opportunity for them to get in brooding cover that allows them to escape the elements, that is going to kill them. And if you focus, my poult rearing success is really poor, I'm going to take out a bunch of predators, they're still going to die because they're dying from exposure, not predation. And I don't think people put that together. But if you have that high quality brooding cover, not only do you accomplish this more, basically a range of temperature thresholds that allow them to survive that, you also produce really high quality insect production. They have to eat exclusively protein at that point, or nearly exclusively protein, because they're growing so fast. They're growing feathers, skeletal growth. Protein comes in the form of insects. And a lot of the plants that we're promoting, forbs, broadleaf herbaceous plants, they're highly desirable in that case, produce not only that range of thermal environments that are needed, it also produces a ton of insects that allow them to get to flight faster, like you talked about. And that's the key bottleneck right there. We need to get them through the elements and to flight. And if we can do that, their survival jumps substantially from there. So that's a bottleneck, but predation is not typically the thing that limits them through that. But it can be if you've accomplished habitat through those other practices and you have really high quality brooding cover available. Then predation might rank higher on that, the list of reasons to die, but you've also made them far less at risk to predation because they have adequate cover, particularly at that stage, to survive or avoid aerial predators, so avian predators in particular. So if we have this high quality understory that is really high quality for brooding, they have essentially a canopy of forbs over top of them. And they have a lot of bare ground underneath that to run around under and catch bugs. So they're concealed from the aerial predator at that level. And I don't think that people necessarily think of it that way, that when you accomplish that kind of structure and make it available to them, not only do you get them past all those other reasons to die, it also makes them far less vulnerable to predation at the same time, which is why you would see all of the habitat kind of snowballs into much higher productivity, because you're addressing all of those things at once. Whereas another form of predator management, you may only address one of them, and you might be doing that fairly poorly at that.
Yeah, here's another here's another sound bite for everybody. Guess what? It works for deer too.
Yeah, same principles.
Yeah,
yes.
We talked with Dr. Will, we were on there too. It's like, predator control should be like step 10 out of 10. If you've got good habitat, they've evolved ways to avoid predation, their whole existence, and like you said, the example, going back to what we're talking about with forest. Yeah, you go in there and you remove raccoons or coyotes or whatever it is, you still have no cover. You still have nowhere for them to nest or brood or anything.
Yeah.
Right.
And there are lots of other reasons that those life stages they're running the gauntlet then.
Yeah.
Predators are only one part of it, and they're kind of the end part of it. And we've clearly demonstrated this in the literature with several species. Particularly quail is the one that I think of as having really good data on it. If you improve habitat, you improve productivity substantially. If you only trap, you do not. If you improve habitat and then add trapping on it, you can get a bump on the productivity from habitat. That varies based on where you're at in the situation, but that's a pretty good template for you to think about how to really increase productivity of turkeys.
Nice. Let's transition, Mark, into talking about what you guys have going on with the Turkey Project. I don't know how much you guys have actually started with that, but I know you guys have started implementing a pretty big turkey project. I know Dr. Marcus would like to hear about it as well. So let's talk a little bit as you're kind of getting close to time here, kind of talk about that project that you guys have going on in Ohio. I think it's working with Pennsylvania as well, or is it just
That's
Ohio?
right. There's 4 states involved: Ohio, Maryland, and New Jersey. So it's a hen study focused on hen survival and nesting success, and for all the reasons that we described. And I'm glad you didn't make me talk about weather and predation. It's got me in hot water in Ohio. And Marcus,
I didn't. Yeah. See, I'm on the private side. He's on the academic side. They can't yell at us as much as they can you.
Oh, they can. Yeah.
They can. Yeah. But
I appreciated being able to sit back and be quiet on all of those issues. And again, I couldn't have said it better than Mark.
Yeah. I don't read comments, so they can yell at me all they want. I stay away from it.
So in Ohio, we've experienced long-term trends in wild turkey populations very similar to what other states have experienced. Some are a little bit ahead of us in what we see in this long-term decline. Some of the southeastern states, it seems, maybe are a little bit ahead of us, but recruitment is of concern across the range. Recruitment of poults into the population. And to understand that better, we need to know what's going on with hens. We need to know what's going on with nesting, and to the degree that we can investigate it, poult survival. That's a really challenging area of wild turkey life cycle to understand, and Marcus can speak more to some of the issues there maybe. But in Ohio, we had 3 consecutive years of really poor poult production. 2017, 2018, and 2019. And those started to become most evident in spring seasons that followed those years, as you would expect, as our Jake class and our 2-year-old gobbler class and our 3-year-old gobbler class all were really weak coming out of those poor poult years. Hunters became very concerned. Just folks that are interested in wild turkey population became very concerned because they were seeing a lot fewer birds than they're used to seeing, and that's what you would expect when we've got evidence that poult production was below average for such a long period. So anyway, we initiated this study. Well, I should say Pennsylvania initiated this study. They're ahead of us by a year. So Pennsylvania Game Commission is in their second field season, and they reached out to us when they saw some of the issues that were going on in Ohio, not only with declining spring harvest, but we had some bag limit changes that accompanied that decline. And so at that time, Pennsylvania Game Commission reached out to the Ohio Division of Wildlife and said, we've got this hen study going on. It'd be really great to be able to expand that and see what's going on in sort of the region rather than within individual states. So we were very happy that it worked out. We were able to jump on in that project, and we're in our first year, just caught our first birds last week, got a handful of transmitters out. We're hoping the weather is not really cooperating, but we're hoping to keep catching birds. We're warm and rainy, which is not ideal for catching turkeys. And so we're going to follow 50 birds through 50 wild turkey hens through this first year, and we're going to increase that number to 100 next year, and essentially follow those hens throughout the year. So as I mentioned, we'll get some estimate of survival on those hens. We'll follow them very intensively through the nesting season, documenting nest attempts, success, and then we'll follow up with any successful hens that successfully hatch poults. We'll follow up with them about 3 weeks post-hatch and try to get some sense of how many poults they've got with them at that time. And then again, follow them throughout the rest of the year and get some sense of survival. All of that information is tremendously important for us in our regulation setting process. Ohio, we've got spring season and of course fall season. We want to know that our spring hunting season is timed appropriately with the nesting chronology of the bird in the various regions of Ohio. We want to know that hen survival is sufficient through the fall through the fall hunting season, that we can maintain that opportunity in its current form or make adjustments if necessary. So this is a really important study. We haven't had anything of this scale for almost 2 decades. It's been about 17 years since we really thoroughly examined hen survival and reproductive success. And that was a time when Ohio was really reaching its peak in turkey abundance following restoration. So the last estimates of some of these parameters that we had came when wild turkey numbers were booming in Ohio. And so there's reason to believe that we're probably going to see some differences in hen survival and reproductive output from when this was previously examined 17 years ago.
Yeah, I talked to Dr. Gates, a little bit about it. I had mentioned to you, I ran into him and we were talking about it. It's going to be interesting to see, I told him, you guys ever need a site in Northeast Ohio? We got tons of birds if you guys want to trap them or tag them in the fall. We're so close to the PA border too. But you mentioned, season dates and the chronology of nesting. Let's talk about that a little bit. And, I'll let you guys, whoever, Marcus or whoever, talk about, the actual, what goes on with nesting. Like, okay, in the spring we have breeding, in April, and then the nesting, all that other stuff. So let's talk about that a little bit and kind of how that's affecting, bag limits a little bit, but season dates, because I know, Dr. Marcus, you guys have been talking to a lot of different agencies and stuff like that are shifting dates. I don't think we've made any changes, Mark. I think ours is still pretty much the same. What is it? It's, I wrote it down. I think it's April 29th, towards the end of April, I think is our opening, for all day. But anyway, let you guys kind of go and talk about that.
Yeah. So we did a whole series. We actually opened with that because that topic on Wild Turkey Science, that topic is something that affects everyone that is, interacting with turkeys everywhere. Because it's, when just deciding when and to what degree you can hunt in some cases. So we have talked to various scientists on the season frameworks and why adjustments are being made and why, like ecologically, why that might or may not matter. So essentially, what people are seeing happen is there's been some work done over the past couple of decades that suggested how biologically we should structure seasons to reduce impact on productivity, and that originally came in the late 90s, and they kind of laid it out. Healy and Powell, if you guys want to go look at it, it's freely available document, but they essentially proposed a structure of the season that would make sense biologically, because this is one of the few game birds that we actually hunt during the reproductive part of their life cycle. So that's where that started. And then more recently, there was another paper that was Isabel et al. And that paper is also freely available. And I'm happy to give this to anybody that wants it. They looked at some different ways that we could restructure seasons that would be more biologically appropriate based on some of those, this history here and from these game bird scientists. And they suggested that it would be more appropriate to move back the opening hunting to coincide with the peak nesting. And the reasons for that they were proposing are that if we're hunting birds that are gobbling and they're in reproductive cycle, that hunting could influence success of breeding by disrupting males or something along those lines. There's various mechanisms and hypotheses for the role that would play. And there's also one hypothesis linked to that we've basically a hypothesis for why we might be seeing declines across so many places that are kind of linked to that idea. We had a couple of scientists on there leading two research experiments that are both long-term. One of them, they just got to 1,000 birds in it from Tennessee. And they actually experimentally manipulated the season frameworks in both of those studies, one in Mississippi, one in Tennessee. And as of yet, they have not seen a response in vital rates to that moving. So that doesn't mean like it hasn't closed the door on it, but there's still uncertainty. But one thing that state agencies have at their disposal that they can affect at a broad scale is to move the timing of seasons or adjust bag limits. That's a lever that can be pulled. And there are some benefits of doing that aren't biological as well. One of the Mississippi research showed it pretty clearly that the people engaged in that hunting framework actually did not lose opportunity in the form of killing less birds by moving the season. But what they did gain is they heard a lot more gobbling because the turkeys were more primed when they started hunting. And, that was a benefit that they saw, even though there weren't more turkeys on the landscape, produced. There wasn't higher productivity. They did hear more gobbling because when season opened, the gobblers were primed for that. But it's kind of, that you're seeing work commissioned all over the place. And it sounds like some of the work up in your guys' neck of the woods is interested in that same topic to try to figure out what is the role of hunting pressure and that timing, and does it warrant adjustment to be more conservation oriented, so that we have a sustainable hunting structure.
Yeah, it's definitely a polarizing topic. I mean, I've seen, like I said, I've seen the comments after you guys released that episode, going through there, and it's just, I think it's one of those cultural things again too. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of that, and people just don't like change, whether it's a change in deer season, whether it's a change
Yeah.
in turkey season, whatever it is. I think people just don't like change inherently.
Yeah.
But looking at it from the biological aspect of, not having a turkey season open the first week of April,
Mm-hmm.
and really have disruptions versus,
It's first week
pushing
of
it off.
March in Florida.
Oh yeah. So, those types of things, I mean, from the biological standpoint, like you have to look at it from that framework
Mm-hmm.
and to say, of course, I would expect that it would have some disruption in the natural,
Mm-hmm.
ecological cycles of these game birds affecting not only the population numbers, but obviously, the hunting success. I mean,
Right.
that's the name of the game. We're doing all this management and things like that to, see more birds,
Right.
type of thing. So,
Well, no,
yeah.
I think, often, especially in some situations where we have strong indicators that there's a major issue with productivity, sometimes we have to go ahead and make that leap before we have the data. And I think there's some frustration on that in some places. And I think also the commission should be commended because there are actually, I mean, right now there's more turkey research going on than probably in my entire lifetime.
Yeah.
At any one time in my entire lifetime, there has never been the amount of work that's being put into turkeys right now. We have work in almost every state. I mean, that was one of the reasons that we wanted to do our podcast, is so that we could link people to all of that research and nearer to real time, and be kind of a hub for that, because it's a really awesome thing. And a lot of that work is being funded by or conducted by state agencies, trying to make sure that we are doing things sustainably so that we can enjoy this resource in abundance for generations.
Yeah, for sure. Well, gentlemen, I think we are at the threshold here. A lot of good stuff. I think, like I said, the turkey management, I think, is one of those things that, just like everything, it's polarizing. You're not going to please everybody. There's going to be people aggravated about it. I mean, no matter what it is. You're talking about deer, turkey, pheasant, waterfowl, whatever it is. You're not going to make everybody happy. But I think the positive is that there is at the state level, like, Mark's talking about, with what Ohio's doing in Pennsylvania, and Dr. Marcus with what you guys are doing and all the other states that are doing. There is a lot of research going into this, and managing for turkeys, it takes work, but everything does. If you want to manage your property and go down that path as a hunter, I mean, it's like Dr. Harper says, it's not a singular event. It's a way of life. And you have to really have a passion for wanting to do it. And, the ways in which that we successfully manage, they should be fun. You should like going outside and doing these things. And whether you're looking for stand locations or whatever, you should also be looking for trees. Like there's that beach tree, like that sucker's coming out, type of thing. And just, you're always managing that little bit again, Dr. Harper, but anyway, I thank you guys for coming on. Why don't you guys go ahead, Dr. Marcus, plug how people can get a hold of you. Of course, the podcast, I'll have a link to in the description for the podcast. And then, Mark, if people want to get a hold of you, and we'll end it there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One thing everybody always says, you can't make everybody happy, but apparently you can make everybody mad.
Yes, that's very true.
We've managed to do that. So I try to be really easy to get a hold of, and the way that I am most responsive most quickly is through Instagram, and I get messages constantly on there, and I try to answer all of them. So that's at Dr. Disturbance. Also, I'm really easy to find in terms of email. It's just my name at ufl.edu. So I'm happy to take questions or anything through either of those places. And thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, and hope people got something out of it.
Mark?
Yeah, easiest way. The Ohio Division of Wildlife website is wildohio.gov. You've got contact information on that website. If you don't find my direct contact information, we've got some general phone line and email there. And if you ask enough turkey questions, they'll send it. I promise.
Yeah, it's going to get funneled to you. That's awesome. All right, guys. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed today's episode, and we'll see you guys all next time. All right, everybody, that is a wrap for another episode here at the HuntScience podcast. If you like today's episode, take a moment right here, hit that subscription button, hit the like button, as well as hit that bell notification so you can get updates on future content that we release here on the channel. If you like today's video, go ahead over here, click here. You can find our playlist and see other videos like today's topics or other videos surrounding other topics. So once again, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, and we look forward to seeing you next time.